Hello and welcome to another video by Rick Miracle Me in my series Freemasonry and Satanism. I have a new book here and a very interesting story to tell. Unbelievable. Body of Secrets. National Security Agency. The anatomy of the ultra-secret National Security Agency. So who controls the USA? Who controls Europe? Who controls the world? Think about it. James Bamford, best-selling author, The Puzzle Paris, a magnificent achievement and a compelling read for anyone interested in espionage. The Baltimore Sun. The back of the book. Extraordinary, a galvanizing narrative brimming with heretofore undisclosed details. The New York Times Book Review. The National Security Agency is the world's most powerful, most far-reaching espionage organization, now with a new afterwords describing the security lapses that preceded the attacks of September 11, 2001. Body of Secrets takes us to the inner sanctum of America's spy network. In the follow-up to his bestseller, Puzzle Palace, James Bamford reveals the NSA's hidden role in the most volatile world events of the past and its disparate scramble to meet the frightening challenges of today and tomorrow. Oh my! So I want to take a peek here at something that happened a long time ago. And in the scope of time, it wasn't that long ago. It was after World War II, after 1948 when the State of Israel was created. It was the bombing to smithereens of the USS Liberty, an American intelligence ship. No rocket launchers, no serious weapons. It had antennas. It was just ears. It wanted to go places and listen and report. It was an old battleship. So there's a lot I could say, but I think the best thing I could do is to just start reading and let the story tell itself. All right, here we go. At 8:20 on a spring evening, amid the noisy clatter of the teletype machine, a technician tapped out a brief flash message to the Liberty. Make immediate preparations to get underway. When ready for sea, ASAP, depart Port Abidjan and proceed best possible speed to Rota, Spain to load technical supplies, material. When ready for sea, proceed to operating area off Port Said. Specific areas will follow. So they're heading to be off the coast of Israel. Here's that little message. So here you are on duty off the coast of Africa, and you get that message at 8:20 in the evening. In the cold black ivory night, an island of light lit up the end of the long wooden pier where the USS Liberty lay docked. Beyond in the harbor, small dots of red and green blinked like Christmas tree lights as hulking cargo ships slowly twisted with the gentle tide. It was around 3:45 a.m. when Lieutenant Jim O'Connor woke to a knock on his stateroom door. So the sun hadn't risen yet. The duty officer squinted as he read the message in the red glow of the emergency light. Still half asleep, he mumbled a curse and quickly threw on his trousers. It was a message from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So this comes pretty high up, right under the President, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. O'Connor recalled telling his cabin mate, "Whoever heard of the Joint Chiefs of Staff taking direct control of a ship?" Within minutes, reveille sounded, and the Liberty began to shudder to life. Within minutes, reveille sounded. I just said that. Less than 3 hours later, the modern skyline of Aberdeen disappeared over the stern of the ship as they departed Africa for the last time. Silhouetted against the rising sun was the large moon bounce antenna on the rear deck, pointing straight up as if praying. I like how some people write. For 8 days at top speed, the bow cut a silvery path through 3,000 miles of choppy Atlantic Ocean. The need for linguists was especially critical on the Liberty, which because of her West African targets carried only French and Portuguese language experts. Therefore, 5 Arabic linguists, 2 enlisted Marines, and 3 NSA civilians were ordered to Rota to rendezvous with the Liberty. So they needed some language interpreters because they were going into the Middle East. Although the ship already had numerous Russian linguists, it was decided to add one more, a senior analytical specialist. NSA, the National Security Agency, had originally wanted to put a Hebrew linguist on the ship, but the agency just didn't have enough. I think that's kind of interesting, seeing that Israel is one of the most powerful countries in the world now. People can't speak Hebrew? "I mean, my God," said Frank Raven, "you're manning a crisis. Where are you going to get these linguists from?" And you go out and ask the nearest synagogue. We got together every linguist we could manage, and we not only sent them to Rota, but then we have to back up every military station in the Middle East. We're sending them into Athens. We're sending them into Turkey. By God, if you can speak Arabic, you're in the NSA. You're on a plane. As the Liberty steamed northward, Marine Sergeant Bryce Lockwood was strapped in a signals intelligence plane flying 30,000 feet above the frigid Norwegian Sea off Iceland. Lockwood was an experienced signal intelligence intercept operator and a Russian linguist. He and his crew members were shadowing the Russian Navy fleet as it conducted summer war games. But the ferret operation had been plagued with problems. A number of the missions had been canceled as a result of aircraft equipment failures, and the one Lockwood was on intercepted only about 3 minutes of Russian voice, which was garbled and no one could understand it. During the operation, Lockwood was temporarily assigned to the U.S. Navy Air Base near Keflavik, Iceland, but as the Russian exercise came to an end, he headed back to his home base, the sprawling Navy listening post at Bremenhaven, where he specialized in analyzing intercepted Russian communications. The plane first flew to Rota, where he was to catch another military flight back to Germany. However, because it was Memorial Day weekend, few U.S. military flights were taking off. He was forced to spend the night. That afternoon, Lockwood went to a picnic, had a few beers, and then went to bed early in his quarters. And I realize some of this may be slow and boring, but it does take us somewhere. A little bit of background setting the stage is a little helpful. Just to see the planning behind this when we get to the action. About 2 a.m., he was suddenly woken by some loud pounding on his door. Assuming it was just a few of his fellow Marines wanting to party, he pulled the cover over his head and ignored it. But the banging only got louder. Now angry, Lockwood finally threw open the door. Standing in front of him in the dim light was a sailor from the duty office. "I have a message with your name on it from the Joint Chiefs of Staff," he said somewhat quizzically. "You're assigned to join the USS Liberty at 600 hours, so 6 o'clock in the morning. You better get up and pack your sea bag." It was a highly unusual, that's a key word there, unusual order. A personal message from the Joint Chiefs of Staff at 2 in the morning. Lockwood had little time to ponder it. So the Joint Chiefs of Staff had a hand in selecting this guy to jump on the ship, had a direct command to have this ship move off the coast of West Africa and head to Spain up the coast, 3,000 miles. So what was the Joint Chiefs of Staff up to? Little drama there. I read all this today and yesterday, and I was just blown away by the story I'm about to share. It was just an hour or so after dawn on the 1st of June when the Liberty slid alongside the pier at Rota. Already waiting for them were the Lockwood and 5 Arabic linguists. A short time later, thick black hoses like boa constrictors disgorged 380,000 gallons of fuel into the ship's tanks, while perspiring sailors in dungarees struggled to load crates of vegetables and other food. Several technicians also retrieved boxes of double-wrapped packages and brought them aboard. The packages contained sensitive signal intelligence data left for them by the Valdez as she passed through Rota on the way back to Norfolk. Included were critical details on Middle East communications patterns picked up as the Valdez transited the area, who was communicating on what links, teletype, telephone, microwave, you name it, says Raven. As she steamed west across the Mediterranean to Rota, the Valdez also conducted hearability studies for NASA, or I should say NSA, not NASA, the National Security Agency, not the Space Center, NASA. The eyes see and the mind says it, so you got to pay attention to what you're reading and speaking. It's not so easy just to read and speak at the same time what you're reading. The NSA, in order to help determine the best places from where to eavesdrop. Off the eastern end of Crete, and Crete, as we all know, is a small island off of the coast of Israel, west of Israel. Has a lot of interesting history. The Valdez discovered what amounted to a duct in the air, a sort of an aerial pipeline that led straight to the Middle East. So apparently right off the coast of Israel, there's an area like a pipeline in the air that from far away you can pick up radio signals. They call it a duct. A duct in the air is sort of aerial pipeline that led straight to the Middle East. You can sit in Crete and watch the Cairo television shows, says Raven. If you're over flat water, basically calm water, the communications are wonderful. He decided to park the Liberty there. But the Joint Chiefs of Staff had other ideas. And Rota, Commander McGonigal, you have to get used to me saying that. This captain's here a lot. So McGonigal received orders to deploy just off the coast of Israel and Egypt, but not to approach closer than 12.5 nautical miles to Egypt and 6.5 to Israel. So if you know anything about Israel, on the southern end is Sinai, a big island chunk of land, and across the Sinai is Egypt. Okay. Following some repairs to the troublesome dish antenna, the Liberty cast off from Rota, Spain, just after noon on June 2nd. Sailing at 17 knots at top speed, the Liberty overtook and passed 3 Soviet ships during its transit to the Straits of Gibraltar. From there it followed the North African coastline, keeping at least 13 miles from shore. 3 days after departing Rota on June 5th, as the Liberty was passing south of Sicily, Israel began its long-planned strike against its neighbors, and the Arab-Israeli war began. So before they started the war, Liberty was already told to pack up and head up and get supplies and get some linguists aboard. The Joint Chief Staffs were sending the Liberty to be offshore with the big antennas and listen to everything. So apparently the Joint Chiefs of Staff knew that the war was about to begin. You think? On June 5th, 1967, only 3 years from 1970. At 7:45 a.m. Sinai time, 1:45 a.m. in the morning, Washington, D.C., Israel launched virtually its entire air force against Egyptian airfields. So apparently the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States knew this was going to happen. They were positioning a ship and equipment and a lot of other things as we read on. So Israel is launching virtually everything against the Egyptians, Israel, destroying within 80 minutes the majority of Egypt's air power. On the ground, tanks pushed out in 3 directions across the Sinai towards the Suez Canal. Fighting was also initiated along the Jordanian and Syrian borders. At least people forget or don't know. Syria has been under siege for quite a few years now, as they've been bombing, of course, and destroying all the countries in the Middle East since 9/11. So these do have, these 2 incidences, plus many others, are all connected to a longer range plan. Even World War I, World War II. For the Zionists to take control of Palestine and the Middle East has been a long sought for plan for 300 years by the Illuminati in Zionism. And it's part of some kind of biblical prophecy. It really is important that we, the people, get an understanding of what's going on, because it's going on today, December 9th, 2017. Even with the last week, a couple days ago, President Donald Trump announcing Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel. And of course, uprisings all over the Middle East are taking place on the front page of newspapers, from Pakistan to Turkey. This is no small thing by any means, that what happened with President Donald Trump doing that. And it's related to what I'm about to read about. So the fighting was also initiated along the Jordanian and Syrian borders. Simultaneously, Israel officials put out false reports to the press saying that Egypt had launched a major attack against them and that they were defending themselves. In Washington, June 4th, had been a balmy Sunday. President Johnson's national security advisor, Walt Rostow, even stayed home from the office and turned off his bedroom light at 11 p.m. This is 1967. Remember, President John Kennedy was killed in 1963, and Mr. Johnson had assumed the presidency. President John Kennedy wanted to expose the secret societies that were repugnant to the American life. And of course, he was assassinated. And now Johnson, who was super friendly to Israel, was replaced as president. And 3 years later, we have more warfare going on in the Middle East. It is all connected. So, simultaneously, Israel officials put out false reports to the press saying that Egypt had launched a major attack against them and that they were defending themselves. I'm not trying to do an audiobook. It's a big, thick book. Please go buy the book. I'm only trying to talk about one story here, a few pages. But oh my, is it a story. So the phone rang a little over an hour after Israel launched its attack, 2 a.m. in the morning. We have an FBIS, Foreign Broadcast Information Service, report that the UAR had launched an attack on Israel. So Israel was saying that they were attacked by the Egyptians. United Arab, said a husky male voice from the White House Situation Room. Go to your intelligence sources and call me back, barked Rostow. 10 minutes later, presumably after checking with the NSA and other agencies, the aide called back and confirmed the press story. Okay, I'm coming in, Rostow said, and then asked for a White House car to pick him up. As the Black Mercury quickly maneuvered through Washington's empty streets, Rostow ticked off in his mind the order in which he needed answers. At the top of the list was discovering exactly how the war had started. A few notches downward was deciding when to wake up the president. So they managed to take out all of Egypt's air power in 80 minutes. So I can't see how Egypt had did a surprise attack on Israel. It was Israel that surprise attack on Egypt, which is why they took out all the Egyptian air power in 80 minutes. The car pulled into Pennsylvania Avenue, gate at 3:25, and Rostow was quickly on the phone with Secretary of State Dean Rusk, who was still at home. I have assumed you've received the flash, he said. They agreed that if the facts were as grim as reported, Johnson should be awakened in about an hour. Intelligence reports quickly began arriving, indicating that a number of Arab airfields appeared to be inoperative, and the Israelis were pushing hard and fast against the Egyptian Air Force. So apparently, if you read about this at all, it was a sneak attack on Egypt by the Israelis, and including Syria, Jordan, the 1967 war. Sitting in the mahogany conference table in the Situation Room, a map of Vietnam on the wall, Rostow picked up the phone. "I want to get through to the president," he said. "I wish him to be awakened." 3 stories above, Lyndon Johnson picked up the phone next to his carved wood bedside. "Yes," he said, answering the phone. "Mr. President, I have the following to report." Rostow got right to the point, right to business. "We have information that Israel and the UAR, Egypt, are at war." For the next 7 minutes, the National Security Advisor gave Johnson the shorthand version of what the United States then knew. About the same time in Tel Aviv, Foreign Minister Abba Eban summoned U.S. Ambassador Walworth Barber to a meeting in his office building. An ever larger curtain of lies around Israel's true activities and intentions. Eban accused Egypt of starting the war. All right, moving on, page 192. The American ambassador Barber quickly sent a flash message back to Washington. Early this morning, he quoted Eban, the Israeli leader. "Israelis observed Egyptian units moving in large numbers towards Israel, and in fact, considerable force penetrated Israeli territory and clashed with Israeli ground forces. Consequently, GOI, Government of Israel, gave order of attack." Eban told Barber that his government intended to protest Egypt's action to the United Nations Security Council. "Israel is the victim of Nassau's aggression," he said. Eban then went on to lie, it says lie here, about Israel's goals, which all along had been to capture as much territory as possible. GOI, the Israeli government, had no no intention taking advantage of the situation to enlarge its territory. That hopes peace can be restored with present boundaries. Finally, after half an hour of deception, Eban brazenly asked the United States to go up against Russia on Israel's behalf. Israel, Barber reported, asked our help in restraining any Soviet initiative. The message was received at the White House at 2 minutes before 6 in the morning. So who do you think started this war? Who had the motive? Who wiped out all of Egypt's Air Force's bases in 80 minutes? You can't do that if they started the war. You had to know they were coming if they started the war. I suspect the Egyptians had no idea. Totally defenseless. I've already pre-read all of this, and I've read a whole lot of other stuff and shared it in my videos. There is a plan, it's underway, and it's going on just as much now, 2017, December 9th, as it was in 2001, 9/11, as it was in 1940 when World War II started, as it was in 1914 when World War I started, after the Illuminati, Zionist, elite Jewish banksters took over control of the USA money supply after not having control of it for 30 or 40 years. Some presidents were killed and poisoned because they were opposing these people controlling the USA money supply. And apparently during the 1800s, they were controlling the money supplies in Germany, doing the same thing. I've mentioned all this in previous videos. About 2.5 later, in a windowless office next to the war room in the Pentagon, a bell rang 5 or 6 times, bringing everyone to quick attention. A bulky gray Russian teletype suddenly sprang to life, and keys began pounding out rows of cyrillic letters at 66 words a minute onto a long white roll of paper. For the first time, an actual online encrypted message was shuttering off the Moscow to Washington hotline. As it was printing, the presidential translator, a military officer expert in Russian, stood over the machine and dictated a simultaneously rough translation to a teletype operator. He in turn sent the message to the State Department, where another translator joined in working on the translation, in which both U.S. experts agreed. The machine was linked to similar equipment in a room in the Kremlin, not far from the office of the chairman of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, known formally as the Washington-Moscow Emergency Communication Link, and in Moscow as the MO-Link. The hotline was activated at 6:30 p.m. on August 30th, 1963, largely as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The message that June morning in 1967 was from President Aksel Kizhyn. The Pentagon and State Department translators agreed on the translation. So the leader of the USSR was contacting the United States of America. Dear Mr. President, having received information concerning the military clashes between Israel and the United Arab Republic, the Soviet government is convinced that the duty of all great power is to secure the immediate cessation of military conflict. The Soviet government has acted and will act in this direction. We hope that the government of the United States will also see in the same manner and will exert appropriate influence on the government of Israel, particularly since you have all opportunities in doing so. This is required in the highest interest of peace. Respectfully, A. Kizhyn. I'm probably saying the leader of the USSR, Russia, the wrong way. So apparently the Joint Chiefs of Staff days earlier had called up the USS Liberty, sent a message, and diverted them off the coast of Africa to go be a listening post, and had also sent some men to intercept them to get on board and supplies. So apparently in the United States of America, they knew what was looming ahead. Once the presidential translator finished the translation, he rushed it over to the general in charge of the war room, who immediately called Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara several floors above. McNamara had arrived in his office about an hour earlier. Premier Kizhyn, the USSR leader, is on the hotline and asked to speak to the president. The war room general barked, "What should I tell him?" "Why are you calling me?" Mr. McNamara asked. "Because the hotline ends in the Pentagon," the general huffed. McNamara later admitted that he had no idea that the connection ended a short distance from him. "Patch the circuit over to the White House Situation Room, and I'll call the president," McNamara ordered. So McNamara, not having been in on the early morning White House phone calls, assumed Johnson would still be sleeping, but he put a call through anyways. The sergeant posted outside the presidential bedroom picked up the phone. "The president is asleep and doesn't like to be awakened," he told the Pentagon chief, not realizing that Johnson had been awake since 4:30 a.m. discussing the crisis. I know that, but wake him up, McNamara insisted. Mr. President, McNamara said, the hotline is up and Christ-Gen wants to speak to you. What should we say? My God, Johnson replied, apparently perplexed. What should we say? These are our leaders? McNamara offered an idea. I suggest I tell him you will be in the Situation Room in 15 minutes. In the meantime, I'll call Dean and we'll meet you there. Within half an hour, the American-supplied teletype was cranking out English letters in the Kremlin. Johnson told Christ-Gen that the United States did not intend to intervene in the conflict. About a dozen more hotline messages followed over the next few weeks. As the first shots of the war were being fired across the desert wasteland, the NSA had a box seat. A fat Air Force C-130 airplane listening post was over the eastern Mediterranean, flying a figure-8 pattern off Israel and Egypt. So the NSA were watching everything. Had a big old plane up there just flying around. Can't claim ignorance, but I'm going to tell you, they do claim ignorance. Later, the plane landed back at its base, a Greek Air Force section of Athens International Airport, with nearly complete coverage of the first hours of the war. From the plane, the intercept tapes were rushed to the proceeding center, designated USA 512J by the NSA. Set up a year before by the U.S. Air Force Security Services, NSA's air arm, it was to process intercepts, analyzing the data, and attacking the lower-level ciphers produced by Air Force eavesdropping missions throughout the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Middle East. So everybody's spying on everybody. The Russians are listening with its spies, all kinds of radio messages and teletypes. The Brits are listening, the American NSA are listening, Israel is listening. Probably the only one that was not technically advanced was Egypt and some of the Arab countries. But what else is new? Unfortunately, they were not able to listen to the tapes of the war immediately because they had no Hebrew linguist. Now wait a minute. If Prime Minister Sharon of Israel, you can look this up, said in a heated argument in his Congress, "Don't worry about America. We control America and the Americans know it." How come the Americans don't have any Hebrew linguist? It was meant to be that way. As I keep reading this over and over in this story I'm about to tell, it is obvious that somebody doesn't want America to have Hebrew linguist. So when they interpret message, you can't understand the message. However, an NSA Hebrew linguist support team was at that moment winging its way to Athens to hide their mission and to avoid the implication of spying on Israel. So the government of the United States wants to hide the fact that it's spying and listening to what Israel is doing. Hebrew linguists were always referred to as special Arabic linguists within the NSA. So they don't even want to call them Hebrew linguists. They wanted to call them special Arabic linguists. Something's not right here. Soon after the first cryptic message arrived at NSA, an emergency notification was sent to the U.S. Navy listening post at Rota. The base was the Navy's major launching site for airborne eavesdropping missions over the Mediterranean area. There, the Navy's airborne signet unit, VQ-2, operated large 4-engine aircraft that assembled the civilian passenger plane that resembled the civilian passenger plane known as the Constellation, an aircraft with graceful curving lines and a large three-section tail. Nicknamed the Willie Victor, the EC-121M was slow, lumbering, and ideal for eavesdropping. Capable of long 12 to 18-hour-long missions, depending on such factors as weather, fuel, altitude, intercept activity, and crew fatigue. With all this technology, just me thinking here, why would they send an old tired ship, the USS Liberty, off the coast of Africa into the hotbed of this looming war that probably the Joint Chiefs of Staff had communicated with Israel, knew about what Israel was going to do, and even wanted to get the United States to be on the offensive if Russia intervened? There's more going on here than we'll ever know, I suspect. Within several hours of the tasking message, the EC-121 was airborne en route to Athens, from where the mission would be staged. A few days before, the temporary Navy Signals Intelligence Processing Center had been secretly set up at the Athens airport near the larger U.S. Air Force Signet facility. So just days earlier, they had set up this intelligence processing center? Did they know the war was going to happen? What do you think? Those intercepts from the missions were to be analyzed and the ciphers attacked. After landing, the intercept operators were bused to the Hotel Seville in Ikeland near the Athens airport. The Seville was managed by a friendly Australian and a Greek named Zena. The crew liked the fact that the kitchen and the bar never closed. But they had barely reached the lobby of the hotel when they received word they were to get airborne as soon as possible. "We were in disbelief and mystified," said one member of the crew. "Surely our taskers did not expect us to fly into combat zone in the dead of the night." That is exactly what was expected. A few hours later, the EC-121 was heading east into the dark night sky. Normally, the flight took about 2 or 3 hours. Once over the eastern Mediterranean, they would maintain a dog-leg track about 25 to 50 miles off the Israeli-Egyptian coast, as at an altitude of about 12,000 to 18,000 feet. So a dog-leg track is they just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, up and down the coast, just with all their electronic equipment listening to everything. A few hours later, the EC-121 was heading east in the dark night. The pattern would take them from an area northeast of Alexandria, Egypt, east towards Port Said and the Sinai, which is between Israel and Egypt, in the El Arish area, and then dogleg northward along the Israeli coast to a point west of Beirut, Lebanon. The track would then be repeated continuously. Another signals intelligence plane, the EA-3B, could fly considerably higher, 30,000 to 35,000 feet. So you got 2 planes in the air, one at 12 to 18,000 feet, doglegging back and forth from Egypt and the Sinai and Israel to the Sinai and Egypt, just back and forth. Then you have another plane at the same time, 30,000 to 35,000 feet with electronic equipment, listening to everything going on. You know, you got radio communications between tank commanders and the other tanks, or jets, or command headquarters. You get to record everything. That's important to remember. On board the EC-121 that night was Navy Chief Petty Officer Marvin Norwitzky. So the E-21 was the one that flew at 12 to 18, the lower plane, and that was Chief Petty Officer Norwitzky. And that's important to remember because this guy comes up a lot, who had the unusual qualifications of being a Hebrew and a Russian linguist. Smart guy. Norwitzky. I vividly recall this night being pitch black, no stars, no moon, no nothing, Norwitzky said. The mission commander considered the precariousness of our flight. He thought it more prudent to avoid the usual track. If we head east off the coast of Egypt, toward Israel, we would look on radar to the Israelis like an incoming attack aircraft from Egypt. Then, assuming the Israelis did not attack us when we reversed course, we would appear on Egyptian radar like Israeli aircraft inbound. It indeed was a very dangerous and precarious situation. Instead, the mission commander decided to fly between Crete and Cyprus and then head diagonally towards Al-Rish in the Sinai along an established civilian air corridor. Upon reaching the point some 25 miles northeast of Al-Rish, he would reverse course and begin their orbit. So they didn't want to go in towards Israel looking like an incoming Egyptian planes or aircraft. And they didn't want to leave Israel and go towards Egypt. So what they did is they came down this way and went up and down like this, between the two instead of this way. So it didn't look like the surveillance plane NSA was coming from Israel or coming from Egypt, so they wouldn't get taken out. In the meantime, the slowpoke USS Liberty is sent to park right offshore of Egypt and Israel. Yikes, somebody wanted that ship right there. All right. When we arrived on station after midnight, needless to say, the pucker factor was high. Recalled Norwitzky. The crew was on high nervous alert. Nobody slept in the relief bunks on the flight. The night remained pitch black. What in the devil were we doing out here in the middle of a war zone was a question I asked myself several times over and over during the flight. The adrenaline flowed. In the small hours of the morning, intercept activity was light. The Israelis were home rearming and reloading for the next day's attacks, while the Arabs were bracing themselves for the next onslaught come daylight. So who is attacking whom? The Arabs are getting under bunkers, and the Israelis are rearming and contemplating some kind of counterattack, says Norwitzky. Eerily, our comment and elite positions were quiet. But that changed as the early morning sun lit up the battlefields. Our receivers came alive with signals, mostly from the Israelis, as they began their second day of attacks. Norwitzky remembered. Around him, Hebrew linguists were furiously gisting, summarizing the conversations between Israeli pilots, while other crew members attempted to combine the information with signals from airborne radar obtained through electronic intelligence. From their lofty perch, they eavesdropped like electronic voyeurs. The NSA recorders whirled as the Egyptians launched an abortive air attack on the advancing Israeli armored brigade. An abortive air attack, so I guess they failed to get the planes in the air, on an advancing Israeli armored brigade, so they had tanks on the way coming across the Sinai from Israel in the northern Sinai, only to have their planes shot out of the air by Israel Delta Wing Mirage aircraft. So even the Egyptian aircraft, they didn't have anything as sophisticated as the Israelis. The Israelis had the Mirage and more. At one point, Nowicki listened to his first mid-air shoot-down. An Egyptian Sahoni 7 aircraft was blasted from the sky. So the technology of the Israelis was just blasting the Egyptian planes right out of the sky. We monitored as much as we could, but soon we had to head to Athens because of low fuel, he said. We were glad to get the heck out of there. Continuing on, as they headed back, an Air Force C-130 plane listening post was headed out to relieve them. So when they were heading back, of course, another plane was heading out to replace them. And apparently they were stacked 2 levels high, different kinds of intelligence planes. This is important to remember. Down below on the seafloor, in the Mediterranean, the Liberty continued its slow journey towards the war zone as the crew engaged in constant general quarters drills and listened carefully to indications of danger. The Navy sent out a warning notice to all ships and aircraft in the area to keep at least 100 nautical miles away from the coast of Lebanon, Syria, Israel, and Egypt. So the Israelis were attacking Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. Again, who were the attackers here? But the Liberty was on an espionage mission. Unless specifically ordered to change course, Commander McGogol, I keep saying his name wrong, I apologize, he's the captain, McGogol, would continue steaming full speed ahead. Meanwhile, the Soviet Navy had mobilized their fleet. Some 20 Soviet warships were supporting vessels, and an estimated 8 or 9 submarines sailed towards the same flashpoint. So here's Israel initiating a war to Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt, bringing in the United States and Russia. They could have started World War III. Think about that. The irresponsibility of the behavior here. By whom and for what? I suspect it's part of the New Age, New World Order, globalism, the stuff that the Zionists have been plotting and planning for 300 years. I've made plenty of videos on these topics. The Jewish Utopia series, 67, written by intelligence retired officer in the United States, Robert Williams. Protocols of Zion, series 8, the manual for what they're going to do, take over the world, and what they're going to do after they take over. All right, moving on with this story. On hearing that war was started, Gene Scheck, an official with NSA's K Group section, which was responsible for managing the various mobile collection platforms, became increasingly worried about the Liberty. So there were some individuals that were increasingly worried about the Liberty. So somebody was sending this ship there for a reason. Responsibility for the safety of the ship, however, had been taken out of the NSA's hands by the JCS, the Joint Command, and given to Joint Reconnaissance Center. Nevertheless, Scheck took it upon himself to remind NSA's representative at the JRC, John Connell, that during the Cuban Missile Crisis 5 years earlier, the Oxford had been pulled back from the Havana area. So during the Cuban Missile Crisis, they did not keep a ship right up in front of the enemy line. Then he asked if any considerations were being given to doing the same for the Liberty. Connell spoke to the ship movement officer at the JRC, but they refused to take any action. So there was this bickering back and forth. Hey, shouldn't we do something? And if you read 911 Synthetic Terror by Webster Tarpley, a lot of these same things I'm going to be discussing here were going on during 911. It seems that certain people were putting people in position or keeping jets on the ground because they knew what was going on in the operation. We got series 2, 911 Synthetic Terror, series, can't remember the number, 11. All right. Although analysis in K group knew of the Liberty's plight, those in G group did not. Thus, it was not until the morning of June 7th that an analyst rushed into Frank Raven's office and asked incredulously, "For God's sake, do you know where the Liberty is?" Raven, believing she was sitting off the east end of Crete, as originally planned, had barely begun to answer when the analyst blurted out, "They've got her heading straight for the beach." By then, the Liberty was only about 10 hours from her scheduled patrol area, a dozen miles off Egypt's Sinai Desert coastline. At this point, recalled Raven, I ordered a major complaint to get the Liberty the hell out of there. As far as we, NSA, were concerned, there was nothing to be gained by having her there in that close. Nothing she could do in there that she couldn't do where we wanted her. So she didn't have to be that close to listen to all the electronic transmissions. She could do everything that the national requirement called for from the coast of Crete. Somebody wanted to listen to some close tactical program or some communications or something which nobody in the world gave a damn about. Local military base commander. We were listening for the higher echelons. So they really weren't trying to listen at the lower level from tank to tank operator or whatever. They were really trying to spy on the higher echelons, the leaders, of course. Hell, you don't want to hear them move the tugboats around and such. You want to know what the commanding generals are saying. The JRC began reevaluating the Liberty's safety as the warnings mounted. The Egyptians began sending out ominous protests complaining that U.S. personnel were secretly communicating with Israel and were possibly providing military assistance. Egypt also charged that U.S. aircraft had participated in the Israeli airstrikes. The charges greatly worried American officials, who feared that the announcements might provoke a Soviet response. Then the chief of naval operations questioned the wisdom of the Liberty assignments. As a result of these new concerns, the Joint Chief of Staff sent out a message indicating that the Liberty's operational area off the Sinai was not to be set in stone, but was for guidance only. Also, it pulled the ship back from 12.5 miles to 20 nautical miles from the coast. But now it was about 6:30 p.m. in Washington, and midnight on the morning of June 8th in Egypt. The Liberty had already entered the outskirts of its operational area, and the message never reached her because of an error in the U.S. Army Communications Center at the Pentagon. An error at the U.S. Army Communications Center at the Pentagon? When they have planes flying at 30,000 feet, planes flying at 16,000 feet, and so much sophisticated equipment, satellites from directly beaming from these planes all the way to the Pentagon? About an hour later, with fears mounting, the JRC again changed the order, now requiring the Liberty approach no closer than 100 miles to the coast of Egypt and Israel, knowing the ship was getting dangerously close. Major Breedlove in the JRC skipped the normal slow message system and called Navy officials in Europe over a secured telephone to tell them of the change. He said a confirming message would follow. Within 10 minutes, the Navy lieutenant in Europe had the warning message ready. But rather than issue the warning, the Navy captain in Europe insisted on waiting until he received a confirming message. That and a series of Keystone Cops follow-ups by both the Navy and the Army, which again misrouted the message, this time to Hawaii, delayed sending the critical message to the incredible 16 and a half hours. By then it was far too late. More than 20 years had gone by since the foul-up of warning message at the time of the attack of Pearl Harbor, yet it was if no lesson had ever been learned. So similar situation to Pearl Harbor, as it says here. And we know these people have a propensity to have false flags. The Hegelian dialectic, you cause something here and blame it on these people. Moving on, at 5:14 a.m. on Thursday, June 8th, the first rays of sun spilled softly over the cyanide blonde waves of sand. Probably at that time there was a lot of blood there too. A little more than a dozen miles north in the choppy eastern Mediterranean, the Liberty continued eastward like a lost innocent, 600 miles from the nearest help, and oblivious to at least a final warning message it never received. The plan of the day, distributed throughout the ship that morning, gave no hint of what was in store. The uniform of the day for officers was the typical wash khakis, and for the enlisted men was clean dungarees. The soda fountain crewmen members were informed would be open from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. So they had a soda fountain open. I guess they felt safe. They were in a danger zone. Just after sunup, duty officer John Scott noticed a flying boxcar making several circles near the ship and then departing in the direction of Tel Aviv back towards Israel. A flying boxcar. So I suppose that would be a surveillance ship. Down on the NSA spaces in the ship, Chief Marvin Smith apparently also picked up signals from the plane, later identified as an Israeli plane. So the Israelis had spotted the USS Liberty with a big US American flag, USA Liberty on the side, and the numbers. These people had seriously sophisticated intelligence, communication equipment, and computers. They knew everything. Shortly after the plane departed, he called up Scott and asked if he had had a close air contact recently. Scott told him he had, and Smith asked which direction had it gone, and Scott said towards Tel Aviv. Fine, that's all I want to know, replied Smith. Scott glanced up at the American flag, ruffling in a 12-knot breeze above the deck, to check the wind direction, and then scanned the vast desert a little more than a dozen miles away. Fabulous morning, he said, without dropping the stubby binoculars from his eyes. So apparently he could see the desert of the Sinai. 16-knot wind isn't too strong, so apparently it was a nice, crispy, clear day. And a boxcar Israeli plane had come by and circled the plane a couple times and flew back. But the calmness was like quicksand, deceptive, inviting, and friendly until too late. As the Liberty passed the desert town of El Arish, it was closely watched, so the Liberty could see what was going on shore. About half a mile away and 4,000 feet above was an Israeli reconnaissance aircraft. At 6:03 a.m., a Navy observer on the plane reported back to Israel Navy headquarters. Apparently Israel has a Navy. What we could see was the letters written on that ship, he said. So they were listening. This is a spy ship with all kinds of antennas all over this huge ship, USS Liberty. So they can hear what the Israelis communicate back to headquarters. We could see what the letters written on the ship, he said, and we give these letters to ground control. The letters were GTR-5 and Liberty's identification. So gigantic big black letters. You can look at the pictures. GTR-5 and in big letters Liberty. GTR stood for General Tactical Research, a covered designation for the NSA's fleet of spy ships. Having passed El Arish, the Liberty continued on the Gaza Strip, toward the Gaza Strip. Then about 8:30 a.m. it made a strange and nearly 180-degree turn. Back to the direction of El Arish and slowed down to about 5 knots. So the ship is barely moving. The reason for this maneuver was that the ship had at least reached Point Alpha, the point on the map where it had begin its back and forth dog-leg patrol. So it was told to go park 20 miles offshore. And what they do, they don't just sit there. They just go slow back and forth. Just like if you've been on a gambling casino ship offshore, you have to go 3 miles out, and then the casino ship just gets outside the legal zone and they can gamble, and they turn the machines on. And it just goes back and forth in a little circle. So here they reach their point where they're supposed to just monitor the transmissions and report back. And they have all these teletype equipment and satellite communications. And as soon as they intercept a message and type it out, they ship it over. Send it by satellite back to the Pentagon. For some time, Commander McGoogle, and I'm sorry for saying his name wrong, the captain, had been worried about the ship's proximity to the shore and about the potential for danger. He called to his cabin Lieutenant Commander David Lewis, head of the NSA operation on the ship. How would it affect our mission if we stayed further out to sea? McGoogle asked. It would hurt us, Captain Lewis replied. We want to work in the UHF ultra-high frequency range, and that's mostly line of sight stuff. If we're over the horizon, we might as well be back in Abidjan. It would degrade our mission by 80%. After thinking for a few minutes, McGoogle made the decision. Okay, he said, We'll go it all the way in. We'll stay here. The reconnaissance was repeated at approximately 30 minutes interviews throughout the morning. At one point, a boxy Israeli Air Force NORAD 2501 circled the ship around the starboard side, proceeding forward of the ship and heading back towards the Sinai. It had a big Star of David on it, and it was flying just a little bit above our mast on the ship, recalled crew member Larry Weaver. We really thought his wing was going to clip one of our masts. And I was actually able to wave to the co-pilot, a fellow on the right side of the plane. He waved back and actually smiled at me. So I guess we can say that the Israelis knew exactly who these people were. I could see him that well. I didn't think anything of that because they were our allies. There's no question about that. They had seen the ship's markings and the American flag. They could damn near see my rank. The underway flag was definitely flying, especially when you're that close in a war zone. By 9:30 a.m., the minaret at El Arish could be seen with the naked eye, like a solitary mast in a sea of sand. Visibility was crystal clear. In the air, about 25 miles or better, you could see. Through a pair of binoculars, individual buildings were clearly visible, a brief 13 miles away. Commander McGougal thought the tower quite conspicuous and used it as a navigation aid to determine the ship's position throughout the morning and afternoon. The Marinette was also identifiable by radar. Although no one on the ship knew at the time, the Liberty had suddenly trespassed into private horror. So private horror was going on the land. The USS Liberty was documenting everything. At that very moment, near the minaret of El Arish, Israeli forces were engaged in a criminal slaughter. From the first minutes to its surprise attack, the Israeli Air Force had owned the skies over the Middle East. Within the first few hours, Israeli jets pounded 25 Arab air bases ranging from Damascus, Syria, to the Egyptian field loaded with bombers and far up the Nile at Luxor. Then using machine guns, mortar fire, tanks, and air power, the Israeli war machine overtook the Jordanian section of Jerusalem. They were firing on the Jordanian section of Jerusalem, as well as the west bank of the Jordan River, and torpedo boats captured the key Red Sea cape of Sharm el-Sheikh. In the Sinai, Israeli tanks and armored personnel carriers pushed towards the Suez Canal along all three of the roads that crossed the desert, turning the burning sands into a massive killing field. One Israeli general estimated that Egyptian casualties there ranged from 7,000 to 10,000 killed, compared to the 275 of his own troops. Few were spared as the Israelis pushed forward. So it was literally a slaughter. And maybe the people on the spy ship Liberty were documenting this. I mean, they could see with binoculars. It had to be quite horrific. I remember, obviously, this guy is a smarter guy than me that wrote this big, thick book. Almost 3 fingers. How many pages? 749 pages. And this is only one story in this book. Body of Secrets. I've been trying to find out what the heck is going on, verify it completely to myself. What's with this New Age, New World Order, World War I, World War II, 9/11, French Revolution, secret societies, all these satanic symbolisms everywhere, rituals during Emmys, Grammys, Super Bowl halftime shows, tunnel openings, Eurovision singing contests. I've mentioned all this stuff over and over and over. Even billboards with bottled water with the 3-6 sign up on it and the colors of the rainbow. The 3-6 is the mark of the beast. Devil signs by politicians, religious leaders. Movie stars doing the Illuminati one-eyed sign. It's all there. It's all connected. Wait till you hear what I'm about to read. A convoy of Indian peacekeeping soldiers, so I suspect they're from India, flying the blue United Nations flag from their jeeps and trucks, were on their way to Gaza when they met an Israeli tank column on the road. So you got Indian peacekeeping soldiers flying a United Nations flag when they run into an Israeli tank column. As the Israelis approached, the UN observers pulled aside and stopped to get out of the way. So the UN, United Nations Indian peacekeepers, pulled over to the side of the road and stopped so that they could let the tanks go by, the Israeli tanks. One of the tanks rotated its turret, its big gun, and opened fire from a few feet away. A few feet away. You're sitting in your Jeep. The United Nations sent you. You're from India. The Israeli tank then rammed its gun through the windshield of the Indian Jeep and decapitated 2 of the men inside. When other Indians went to the aid of their comrades, they were mowed down by machine guns. Another Israeli tank thrust its gun into the UN truck, lifted it, and smashed it to the ground, killing and wounding all the occupants. In Gaza, Israeli tanks blasted 6 rounds into the United Nations headquarters, which was flying the UN flag. 14 UN members were killed in these incidents. One Indian officer called it deliberate, cold-blooded killing of unarmed UN soldiers. It would be a sign of things to come. And I've been doing these videos, and I've been going, warning, warning, warning. Remember Lost in Space, that TV program, and the robot would wave both arms, warning, warning, warning. And I'm saying if they pull off what they're planning on pulling off to bring about this New Age, New World Order globalism, this is how they're going to behave. Like Jade Helm 15, running software computer programs that are going to be making the decision on who lives and who dies. Not people. High advanced technological weapons, directed energy beams, laser beams, microwave transmission systems. Electricity will be cut off, food, water. Here in the USA, Europe, this is supposed to be a world order. It's been planned for a while. There's lots of books about it, websites. People like President John Kennedy were warning about it. Assassinated right after that. And so many more. Back to the book. Just saying, this is the way it goes. By June 8th, 3 days after Israel launched the war, Egyptian prisoners in the Sinai. So here they were overrunning the area where all the Egyptians were, the military, citizens, whatever. And they had them all corralled. and they were becoming a nuisance. There was no place to house them, and not enough Israelis to watch them. Can you see it happening in the United States? And a few vehicles to transplant them to prison camps. But there was another way to deal with them. Page 201 in this book. As the Liberty sat within eyeshot of El Arish, eavesdropping on the surrounding communications, Israeli soldiers turned the town into a slaughterhouse, systematically butchering their prisoners. In the shadow of the El Arish Mosque, they lined up about 60 unarmed Egyptian prisoners, hands tied behind their backs, and then opened fire with machine guns until the pale desert sand turned red. Then they forced other prisoners to bury the victims in mass graves. I saw a line of prisoners and civilians and military, says Abdil Salam Moza, one of those who dug the graves, and they opened fire at them all at once. And when they were dead, they told us to bury them. Nearby, another group of Israelis gunned down 30 more prisoners, and then ordered some Bedoons, some desert Arabs, to cover them with sand. And still another incident in El Arish, an Israeli journalist, Gabi Born, saw about 150 Egyptian POWs sitting on the ground, crowded together with their hands behind their backs of their necks. The Egyptians, prisoners of war, were ordered to dig pits, and then army police shot them to death. Boron said, I witnessed the executions with my own eyes on the morning of June 8th in the airport area of El Arish. The Israeli military historian Ariel Yachi, who worked in the Army's history department after the war, said he and other officers collected testimony from dozens of soldiers who admitted killing POWs. According to Yahachi, Israeli troops killed in cold blood as many as 1,000 Egyptian prisoners in the Sinai, including some 400 in the sand dunes of El Arish. Ironically, Ariel Sharon, remember that's the prime minister later on of Israel, who said, don't worry about the Americans, we control America and the Americans know it. Please go look that up. Don't believe me. And while you're looking it up, if you're taking notes, look up Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and what he said in Fink's Bar. We the people need to wake up. There apparently is a war going on right now. I have a video to add to this video right now, so let me do it. It's a little bit off topic, but it does show that we are at war right now.
Global climate engineering, geoengineering, solar radiation management programs have been wreaking havoc with Earth's climate and life support systems for over 70 years. Illegal climate intervention programs have long since completely derailed natural climate processes, and these programs are still being ramped up further. The entire climate science community and weather reporting agencies continue to betray populations, the environment, and the planet as a whole by their criminal denial of the climate engineering assault. This water vapor loop was captured on December 4th, 2017, the day the latest round of California firestorms ignited. The extremely anomalous concentration of wind currents is a result of what meteorologists have labeled the, quote, ridiculously resilient ridge that has constantly formed over the western U.S. in recent years. This ridge is a direct result of high-pressure zones created by ionosphere heater installations like the HARP installation in Glucona, Alaska. In this image, also captured on December 4th, 2017, the geoengineered high-pressure dome can easily be seen pushing any and all moisture and potentially cooler temperatures well out into the Pacific off the coast of California. In this animation of atmospheric moisture, the usual flow of cool Pacific air and potential precipitation for California appears to be hitting a wall of resistance off the U.S. West Coast. Again, this is a direct result of an ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure dome. This is part of geoengineering. This wind pattern animation loop from December 5th is also revealing. Extremely anomalous wind patterns along the high-pressure dome boundary are very evident and inarguable. This NASA satellite image clearly reveals just how powerful the offshore winds were from the ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure dome. Though there are many agendas behind the climate engineering and near-constant jet aircraft atmospheric aerosol spraying, one of the primary objectives has been and is the temporary cooling off of some regions at the expense of creating often record-high temperatures in other regions. Wherever there is enough moisture, patented chemical ice nucleation materials are now constantly being used by the geoengineers, sprayed by jet aircraft into that moisture above cloud cover. Why? To temporarily create a cool, dense layer of air that reduces Earth's surface temperatures. The result is rapidly worsening extreme weather whiplash scenarios. This NOAA departure from normal high temperature map was the scheduled extreme weather imbalance for December 3rd through December 7th. Fast forward several days to this NOAA scheduled weather map for December 9th through the 13th. This map reveals a complete reversal of the previous week's temperature anomalies. The climate engineers are now pulling the levers of Earth's climate system. At what cost to the planet and the web of life does this manipulation come? The most populated regions of the eastern U.S. have been a consistent target for the temporary and toxic climate engineering cooldowns. Masking the rapidly unfolding planetary meltdown is, again, a primary agenda for the geoengineers. This recording of radio frequency microwave transmissions coming from a facility near Beale Air Force Base in California was captured on November 15, 2017. Wave after wave of incoming precipitation from the Pacific is effectively being blown apart and scattered from the transmission source. Facilities like this are all over the country and all over the world. The climate engineers can effectively disrupt precipitation patterns as they choose. Articles like this one from December 5th, 2017 are the method by which the climate engineers are making clear the fact that they plan to continue making California into a climate sacrifice zone or a target. All such reports ultimately come from weather modeling done by the National Weather Service and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which in turn means defense contractor Raytheon, which in turn means a primary climate engineering patent holder and contractor, which Raytheon is. Again, all available data on climate engineering confirms the fact that the geoengineers can block precipitation from wherever they choose for as long as they choose. This Weather Channel jet stream map was produced a significant time before the anomalous weather events of the latest California firestorm. Yet, the latest freeze-fry weather whiplash scenario for the U.S. is fully scripted and shown on this map. The massive ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure dome in the U.S. West, labeled, quote, again, the ridiculously resilient ridge, will continue to block moisture from California until the geoengineers decide otherwise. Remember where all weather modeling for the National Weather Service and NOAA comes from. Again, private defense contractor and geoengineering patent holder Raytheon. All the rest of the so-called forecasting agencies are reading from the same script. The fight to expose and halt climate engineering is nothing less than a fight for life. Geoengineering climate intervention programs are not only completely derailing and tearing apart Earth's climate systems, the toxic fallout is contaminating the entire planet and every breath we take. All of us are needed in this all-important battle to reach a critical mass of awareness. Only then will we have a real chance at halting the insanity in our skies. Make your voice heard. This is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.
I also went on to the Yahoo image site, and it's an amazing place to get pictures about different things you're interested in. But I did look up the USS Liberty, and I downloaded about 6 or 7 pictures. So I think I'll just do a picture show with me not speaking, with these few pictures, giving you maybe 20 seconds each to look at it. But you can go to the Yahoo image site and put in USS Liberty and see the pictures and the links to each picture and get more information on this bloodbath that happened later. I haven't read the part about the USS Liberty being bombed to smithereens. There's much more supporting data here that there was more nefarious reasons for it. We can see right here, since I've been reading, that they're slaughtering the Egyptians on the Sinai and other people everywhere. And apparently they didn't want that information to get out to the world. Some people say the reason that they sent the Liberty there with the intentions of sinking it was to blame it on the Egyptians to stir up American sentiments against the Egyptians and towards the Israelis. But you do your investigation. I'm doing mine, and I'm not trying to create an argumentative situation. I'm trying to find out what's going on, so I read these books. But I think it's comparable to things like 911 and a lot of the false flags we're having. They're using a lot of the divide and conquer tactics against us to divide us here, even in the U.S. White against black, gays against straights, rich against poor, Americans against the Arabs, Americans against the Mexicans, Americans against the Russians, the Chinese. They just never end. And of course, President Donald Trump declaring Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel. And even in this material I just read, during this 1967 war, they were bombing the smithereens around the Jordanian section of Jerusalem. So there is a mystery religion prophecy behind all this that most people can't grasp, and I don't blame them. It's a complex situation, and it would just take a lot of work to get to the bottom of it. But hopefully my videos are helping. So anyways, I'm going to just have a little picture show, then I'll be back to the book. So maybe people can understand why I photograph and video the sky spraying of chemicals in our sky every day, and all the other things that I've been observing and reporting, reading books and reporting and other material. I just see that from paying attention to the countryside, you can't hardly find bugs, and the plains in central Florida that were swampy used to be green all year long, and now they're brown. And I notice in the mountains here of North Carolina in the wintertime when the leaves fall off all the other trees, the sides of the mountains were still generally green from the evergreens, pine trees and such. And they're dead apparently. Everything looks brown and burnt. I suppose if somebody were to set on fire the forest here in the mountains of North Carolina, it would burn like a raging inferno, like what's happening in California that Dane Wigington's talking about, and so many other people, videos on YouTube. And then I read about this stuff going on in the Middle East and the history of the Zionists for 300 years or more, planning on this getting some kind of Jewish utopia. And a lot of Jewish people who didn't turn towards that kind of a religion, the Kabbalist, satanic religion, the ones who are still with God. Remember, Jesus was a Hebrew. All the Jews didn't want to have him crucified. That was just the elite groups who didn't want to lose their power and positions. So we, people of the world, need to wake up that we are under attack, and even the 5G network, the electromagnetic microwave transmission system coming online, that many people, including scientists, are saying this is the biggest threat of all, because this enables them to just microwave us at will. I think I'll throw a few pictures on this video for just a couple minutes right now and get back to the book. So it's only going to be 2 or 3 minutes of pictures. All I'm saying is my research indicates we're under attack. Socially, economically, physically, spiritually. And then I read this stuff in a book like this. I'm not going to get as far as I wanted to in this video. But ironically, Ariel Sharon, who was capturing territory south of El Arish at the time of the slaughter. So during this 1967 war, they were gaining territory, the Sinai Peninsula, that huge body of land between the mainland of Israel in the Middle East there, and Saudi Arabia, Egypt. capturing territory in El Arish at the time of the slaughter had been close to massacres during other conflicts. So other conflicts they've had in the Middle East, there's been other slaughters. Why would President Donald Trump, well, we know the answer, designate Jerusalem as the capital, which the Zionists have been fighting for 300 years? This is a huge victory for them. Keep that in mind as I read on right now. This is a huge victory for them, getting the United States president to recognize them, Jerusalem, as the Israelis' capital. He didn't say portion of it, because they're always talking about dividing it. There are 4 quarters, an Armenian quarter, the Christian quarter, the Jewish quarter, maybe the Muslims quarter. But there's been a big fight about dividing it. Israel wants it all. And it wants the lines from the Euphrates down to the Nile, which were the old property lines of the ancient kingdom. This has all been disclosed. Called Greater Israel. You can go on the Israeli image site, look up Greater Israel. You'll see the maps. There is a plan here. And they did use World War I, World War II, French Revolution, other revolutions, 9/11. This is an attempt to have a global order. And I say there's a serious spiritual component to it. And they have to destroy all Christians and even any history or memory of Christianity. One of his men during the Suez Crisis in 1956, 10 years earlier, Ariel Bino, now a retired brigadier general, recently admitted the unprovoked killing of 49 prisoners of war in the Sinai in 1956. I had my Carl Gustav weapon I had taken from the Egyptian. My officer had a Uzi. The Egyptian prisoners were sitting there with their faces turned towards us. We turned towards them with our loaded guns and shot them. Magazine after magazine. They didn't get a chance to react. At another point, Burrow said, he found Egyptian soldiers prostrate with thirst. So they were dying of thirst and they're on their prostate. Like, please give us some water. Prostate. He said that after taunting them by pouring water from his canteen into the sand, he killed them. If I were to be put on trial for what I did, he said, then it would be necessary to put on trial at least 1/2 of the Israeli army. Under similar circumstances did what I did. Sharon, the one who says don't worry about America, we control America and they know it, who says he learned of the 1956 prisoner shootings only after they happened, refused to say whether he took any disciplinary action against those involved or even objected to the killings. Later in his career, in 1982, Sharon would be held indirectly responsible for the slaughter of about 900 men, women, and children by Lebanese Christian militia at the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps following Israel's invasion of Libya. Despite his grisly past, and maybe because of it, in October 1998, he was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs to the cabinet of the right-wing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Sharon later took over the conservative Likud party. On September 28, 2000, he set off on a bloodiest upheaval between Israel forces and Palestinians in generations, which resulted in a collapse of the 7-year peace process. The deadliest battles, which killed over 200 Palestinians and several Israeli soldiers, broke out following a provocative visit by Sharon to the compound known as Haram de-Shif, the noble sanctuary, to Muslims and the Temple Mount of the Jews. So right now where King Solomon's temple used to be, apparently is the Temple Mount of the Jews. One of the not the Jews, the Temple Mount right now is the dome, which is one of the most religious sites of the Islamic people, the Arabs. But that's where the Temple Mount is. I'm getting confused here. I need to get a drink of water. The Islamic religion, the Muslim people, is the Temple Mount. It sits on what used to be King Solomon's temple. So that's a big thing about this whole conversation and all this warring, is they want to get the Temple Mount away from the Arabs, and they want to rebuild King Solomon's temple. Anyways, apparently here Sharon was visiting that site, causing a huge uproar, just like President Donald Trump declaring Jerusalem the capital is going to cause a big uproar with those religious people now, which I believe that was the intent. Addressing the question of Israeli war crimes, Sharon said in 1995, Israel doesn't need this, and no one can preach to us about it. No one. Here's the guy who said that they control the United States. Of the 1967 cyanide slaughter, Ariel Yashi said the whole army leadership, including the defense minister Moshe Dayan and the chief of staff, later the prime minister Yahav, Rabin, and generals knew about these things. No one bothered to denounce them. Yakahaz not only were the massacres known, but senior Israeli officers tried their best to cover them up by not releasing a report he had prepared on the murders of 1968. I've been reading here for almost 2 hours, so I think I need a break and a drink of water so I can finish this video. Alright, continuing on, about 10 minutes here to finish this video. So like I said, to me it was a pre-planned directive from Israel, the Zionists, the Illuminati, the secret societies. And Trump made that announcement about recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. It's a fulfillment of a goal that has been worked towards for 300 and more years. And I believe with all this other activity going on, 2015, Jade Helm 15, and other things seemingly like weather control, Dane Wigington talking about it, so many others. The false flags, bombings, shootings, Las Vegas, Sandy Hook, Boston bombing, 9/11, World War I, World War II, and so much more activities is all part of this prophesized antichrist, satanic, New Age religion. It seems to be all connected. So that's why I showed the pictures of the 5G network coming online. You can look up the California fires and some of the videos, people claiming they're using directed energy weapons like laser beams. Judy Wood on her book, I have it. On 911, it looks like they used nuke explosives. And so much more. It seems we're under attack, dumping chemicals in the sky, the environment dying everywhere. So whatever they do, and all the surveillance cameras and listening devices, they do not seem to want any kind of nature's survival foods and water to be available. Whatever is going to happen, it seems like it's going to be quite vicious. And all the fear-mongering about planet Nibiru, pole shifting, global warming, Yellowstone, erupting volcanoes, earthquakes, aliens, channeled material, gray aliens, reptilian beings, and so much more. I think it's all connected. And these books like this showing some of the activities, repeated wars over there where the people are continuously being slaughtered. I've showed this in previous videos. Go on Yahoo image site and just type in Middle East bombed buildings. And it'll show you town after city after country. And they're not attacking some rebels or something. They are bombing those cities and towns to smithereens. A lot of us know this. They're machine gunning the citizens, bombing the citizens, even incendiaries like sulfur, molten lava poured from the sky on these people. I mean, if your heart doesn't ache for these people, maybe it should ache for yourself and myself and our children, because this is a new world order. It isn't just Greater Israel. And the whole rest of the world seems like it's slowly being attacked right now. And the 5G network just boggles my mind. The big, thick cables, a lot of amperage or watts of power. Microwaves, those signals are the same size of the cells of your body. They can turn it on and you'll feel agitated and they'll be cooking you from the inside out. And it's not me. There's tons of this material to go check out. Books. I've got the books. Many of them. I got so many I haven't even gone over. Stuff like this. Chemtrails, HARP, full spectrum dominance, planet Earth. I didn't write this book. I need to make a video on it right away. Just got it in the mail. Elena Freeland. You can go see her speaking on many YouTube videos. So anyways, George Orwell, 1984, apparently is here. We have a problem. All right, I'm going to finish reading this. And obviously I'm going to have to make another video because part 2 of this one, we haven't even begun the detail by detail goings on in the beginning in the entire attack on the USS ship Liberty. I showed you the pictures. Plenty of other books out there you saw in the pictures. But let me read this here and just finish this video. Like I always say, it's just one video at a time. It may seem like a tedious thing to try to find out WTH. What the heck is going on? The extensive war crimes were just one of the deep secrets Israel had sought to conceal since the start of the conflict. From the very beginning, an essential element in the Israeli battle plan seemed to have been to hide much of the war behind a carefully constructed curtain of lies. Lies about the Egyptian threat. Lies about who started the war. Lies about the American president. Lies about the UN Security Council. Lies about the press. Lies to the public. Lies to the press. Thus, as the American Navy historian Dr. Richard Smith noted in an article on the Liberty for United States Naval Institute Proceedings, any instrument which sought to penetrate the smokescreen so carefully thrown around the normal fog of war would have to be frustrated. In the sea of lies, deception, and slaughter sailed the USS Liberty, an enormous American spy factory loaded with $10 million worth of equipment. The latest eavesdropping gear. At 10:39 a.m., the Marinette El Arish was logged at 17 miles away, bearing 189 degrees, sailing 5 knots. The Liberty was practically treading water. By 10:55 a.m., senior Israeli officers knew for certain that they had an American electronic spy in their midst, with all that slaughtering going on. Not only was the ship clearly visible to the forces of El Orish, it had been positively identified by Israeli naval headquarters. The Israeli Navy observer on the airborne reconnaissance mission said that had earlier observed the Liberty, passed on the information to Commander Pinchas Prishani, the Navy liaison officer at Israeli Air Force headquarters. I repeated this detection to Navy headquarters, said Paninchi, and I imagined that Navy headquarters received this report from the other channel, from the Air Force ground control as well. Pinchini had pulled out a copy of the reference handbook, Jane's Fighting Ships, and looked up the GTR-5 designation. So they have a handbook, they can just look up the numbers. He had sent a report to the acting chief of Navy operations at Israel Navy headquarters at Haifa. The report said that the ship cruising slowly off El Arish was an electromagnetic audio surveillance ship of the U.S. Navy named Liberty, whose markings were GTR-5. Not only did the ship have the GTR-5 printed broadly on both sides of its bow and stern, it also had its name painted in large, bold black letters, USS Liberty. Although no one on the Liberty knew it, they were about to have company. And that's where I'll leave this video, because what I read after this, I read all this already. This is the next page. Oops, my lottery ticket there is a marker where I left off. I use old lottery tickets as bookmarkers. And the next couple pages. And the next page, and the next page, and the next page, and the next page. I got another whole couple-hour video here up to page 216, and I just left off at 204. Put my lottery ticket back in there. Thank you for watching my video, Rick Miracle reporting.